Welcome to One Book, One Coffee. You know, the fact that you're here right now, choosing to spend your time with the Bhagavad Gita, says something remarkable about you. In a world where most people are scrolling through endless feeds or binge-watching the latest series, you've made a different choice. You've decided to sit with one of humanity's most profound texts, a conversation that has guided seekers, leaders, and thinkers for over 2 millennia. That takes courage, and it tells me you're someone who values depth over distraction, wisdom over entertainment. The Bhagavad Gita isn't just a book, it's a philosophical masterpiece that tackles the deepest questions we face. How do we act when everything seems uncertain? How do we find purpose in chaos? How do we live with integrity when the world around us feels broken? These aren't abstract questions, they're the very real struggles that leaders like Gandhi wrestled with. In fact, Gandhi called the Gita his spiritual dictionary and carried it with him everywhere. Oprah has spoken about how its teachings transformed her understanding of purpose and action. Even Steve Jobs was deeply influenced by its wisdom during his spiritual journey in India. The traditional attribution goes to Vyasa, the legendary sage compiler, but here's what's fascinating. This wasn't written in some ivory tower. The Gita emerges from the chaos of a battlefield in a moment of complete moral crisis. It's Arjuna, a warrior prince, paralyzed by doubt just as the greatest war of his time is about to begin. And in that moment of breakdown, his charioteer Krishna, who happens to be divine, gives him guidance that has echoed through centuries. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture this. You're sitting in your car in the parking lot of your office, and you've just received a text that's going to change everything. Maybe it's news about a family conflict that's been brewing for years, or perhaps you've discovered that taking your dream job means competing directly against your mentor. Your hands are shaking slightly as you hold your phone, and suddenly the simple act of walking through those office doors feels impossible. This, my friend, is exactly where we find Arjuna at the opening of the Bhagavad Gita, except his parking lot happens to be a battlefield, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The scene opens on the field of Kurukshetra, where 2 massive armies face each other in what would become one of history's most devastating wars. But this isn't just any war story. Arjuna, one of the greatest warriors of his time, asks his charioteer Krishna to drive him between the 2 armies so he can survey the battlefield before the fighting begins. It's a routine military reconnaissance, the kind of thing any good general would do. But as Arjuna looks out across the field, something unexpected happens. He starts recognizing faces. There's his grandfather Bhishma, the man who taught him archery as a child. Over there stands his teacher Drona, who patiently corrected his stance thousands of times until he became the archer he is today. He sees cousins, uncles, friends, and respected elders scattered throughout the opposing army. Suddenly, this war isn't about territory or righteousness anymore. It's about killing people he loves, people who shaped him into who he is. And in that moment, this legendary warrior does something completely unexpected. He breaks down. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times have you found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing felt absolutely wrong? Maybe you had to fire a loyal employee who wasn't performing, or perhaps you needed to set boundaries with a family member who was taking advantage of your kindness. These moments when our values seem to contradict each other, when every choice feels like a betrayal of something we hold dear. This is Arjuna's dilemma writ large. Arjuna's crisis runs deeper than just familial affection, though. He begins questioning the very foundation of his identity. He's a warrior, a kshatriya, born and trained for battle. But what good is victory, he asks, if it comes at the cost of destroying the very people who make life worth living? What's the point of winning a kingdom if there's no one left to share it with? He throws down his bow and arrows and declares that he'd rather be killed unarmed than participate in this massacre. This moment is so relatable it almost hurts. Think about the modern professional who climbs the corporate ladder only to realize they've become everything they once criticized. Or consider the parent who wants to protect their child, but knows that true protection sometimes means letting them fail and learn from their mistakes. These are Arjuna's arrows scattered on the ground. These moments when we question whether the path we're on is actually leading us where we want to go. But here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. Arjuna's breakdown isn't portrayed as weakness or cowardice. It's presented as a moment of profound spiritual awakening. He's not afraid of death or pain. He's afraid of living a life that feels meaningless. He's grappling with questions that every thinking person eventually faces. What is my purpose? How do I balance duty with compassion? Is there a way to act in this world without causing harm? Krishna, his charioteer, doesn't immediately comfort him or tell him everything will be okay. Instead, he challenges Arjuna's thinking. This sets up what becomes one of the most profound philosophical conversations in human literature. Krishna essentially says, "You're asking the right questions, but you're looking at them from the wrong angle." The beauty of Arjuna's crisis is that it's both intensely personal and universally human. Whether you're a CEO making difficult business decisions, a parent navigating your teenager's rebellion, or simply someone trying to figure out how to live authentically in a complicated world, Arjuna's moment of paralysis speaks directly to your experience. What makes this ancient text so enduringly relevant is that it doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't say, "Just follow your heart," or "Do whatever makes you happy." Instead, it acknowledges that life often presents us with genuinely difficult choices where there's no clear path forward. Sometimes duty conflicts with desire, sometimes love conflicts with justice, and sometimes our deepest values seem to contradict each other. As we settle in with our coffee and prepare to explore Krishna's response to this warrior's dilemma, remember that we're not just reading about an ancient battle. We're examining the eternal struggle between action and inaction, between engagement and withdrawal, between accepting the world as it is and working to make it better. Arjuna's crisis is our crisis, and his journey toward resolution offers insights that remain as fresh and challenging today as they were thousands of years ago. Picture yourself sitting with a dear friend who's just asked you one of life's most profound questions. What happens when we die? It's the kind of conversation that naturally unfolds over steaming coffee cups, where time seems to slow down and the weight of existence settles gently between you. This is exactly the territory we're entering as we explore one of the Bhagavad Gita's most transformative teachings about the eternal soul and the indestructible nature of consciousness. Krishna, speaking as both friend and cosmic teacher to the warrior Arjuna, offers us what might be the most comforting and revolutionary understanding of our true nature ever articulated. He tells us something that challenges everything we think we know about death, identity, and what it means to be human. The soul, he explains, is not something we have but something we are, and this essence of who we are is absolutely, unequivocally eternal. Now think about this for a moment. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? Most of us see our physical form, maybe notice a new wrinkle or gray hair, and feel the passage of time written across our faces. But Krishna invites us to look deeper, to recognize that what we're really seeing is like a person wearing different clothes. Just as you might change from your pajamas to work clothes to evening wear throughout a single day, the soul changes bodies throughout different lifetimes, but the essential you remains unchanged. Krishna uses this beautiful metaphor of changing garments to help Arjuna understand death in an entirely new way. He says the soul discards worn-out bodies like we discard old clothes, taking on fresh new ones. Imagine the relief this perspective brings. Death isn't an ending but a transition, like moving from one house to another. The furniture of your consciousness, your memories, your essential nature, all travel with you. But let's bring this ancient wisdom into our modern world for a moment. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to carry an inexplicable depth, as if they've lived many lives? or how children sometimes display wisdom that seems far beyond their years. These glimpses might be echoes of what Krishna is describing, hints that consciousness is far more vast and enduring than our physical existence suggests. The Gita tells us that the soul cannot be cut by weapons, burned by fire, moistened by water, or dried by wind. This isn't just poetic language, it's pointing to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. In our age of neuroscience and brain research, we're discovering that consciousness remains one of the great mysteries. We can map every neuron, trace every electrical impulse, yet the actual experience of being aware, of having subjective consciousness, eludes our instruments. Perhaps this is because we're looking for something eternal, using tools designed to measure the temporary. Consider how this understanding might change your relationship with loss and grief. When someone you love dies, the pain is real and the absence profound. But Krishna's teaching suggests that what made that person uniquely themselves, their essential consciousness, continues on. The love you shared, the connection you felt, these aren't erased but transformed. It's like a radio station that's moved to a different frequency. The music continues even when your old radio can no longer pick up the signal. This perspective on the eternal soul also transforms how we understand our daily struggles and achievements. If you are fundamentally an eternal being having a temporary human experience, then both your failures and successes take on a different significance. That promotion you're anxious about, that relationship that ended, that mistake you made last week, all of these are experiences your eternal self is having, like scenes in a very long movie. They matter, they shape you, they teach you, but they don't define the totality of who you are. Krishna emphasizes that for the soul, there is no birth and no death, only eternal existence. This raises fascinating questions about our attachments and fears. How much of your anxiety stems from trying to preserve something that's actually impermanent? Your body will age, your circumstances will change, your roles in life will shift, but the consciousness experiencing all of this remains constant and indestructible. The practical wisdom here is profound. When you truly understand yourself as an eternal soul, you begin to live with less fear and more purpose. You start to see challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to your existence. You develop what the Gita calls equanimity, the ability to remain balanced whether facing praise or criticism, success or failure, because you know these are temporary experiences happening to your eternal self. As we close this exploration of the soul's eternal nature, consider carrying this perspective into your day like a gentle companion. When stress arises, remember you are the eternal consciousness observing the stress, not the stress itself. When joy comes, celebrate it while knowing you are the awareness experiencing joy, something far more vast than any single emotion. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of your human experience. It enriches it by placing it within the context of your infinite, indestructible nature. Picture this scene with me for a moment. You're sitting at your desk, staring at a mountain of work that needs to be done. Your inbox is overflowing, deadlines are looming, and that familiar knot of stress is tightening in your stomach. You're thinking about the promotion you want, the recognition you deserve, the results you need to achieve. Sound familiar? Well, thousands of years ago, a warrior named Arjuna was facing his own version of this exact dilemma, and the conversation that followed would give birth to one of the most profound approaches to work and life ever conceived. Welcome back to our journey through the Bhagavad Gita. I'm here with my coffee, you're here with yours, and today we're diving into something that's going to completely revolutionize how you think about your daily work and responsibilities. We're exploring karma yoga, the path of selfless action, and trust me, this isn't some abstract spiritual concept that only applies to monks in monasteries. This is practical wisdom that can transform your Monday morning commute, your afternoon meetings, and yes, even your most mundane tasks. So what exactly is karma yoga? Krishna explains it to Arjuna as the art of performing action without attachment to the fruits of that action. Now, Before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like some impossible ideal, let me paint you a different picture. Think about the last time you helped a friend move apartments. You probably didn't spend the whole day calculating what you'd get in return or obsessing over whether they'd help you move someday. You just showed up, lifted boxes, and felt good about it. That, my friend, is a taste of karma yoga in action. Krishna uses a beautiful metaphor to explain this concept. He tells Arjuna that we have the right to perform our prescribed duties, but we're not entitled to the fruits of our actions. It's like planting a garden. You can prepare the soil, plant the seeds, water them, and tend to them with love and care, but you cannot force the flowers to bloom or the vegetables to grow. The results are beyond your control, but the quality of your effort, your attention, your care, that's entirely in your hands. Now, think about this in your own life. How often do you find yourself stressed not by the work itself, but by your anxiety about the outcome? You're giving a presentation, and instead of focusing on delivering your best effort, you're mentally rehearsing all the ways it could go wrong or fantasizing about the applause you'll receive. You're so caught up in the future result that you're not fully present for the actual task at hand. Krishna is essentially saying, what if you could give your absolute best to the presentation, and then genuinely let go of whether it leads to that promotion or recognition you want? But here's where it gets really interesting. Krishna isn't advocating for mediocrity or lack of ambition. He's not saying you should stop caring about excellence. In fact, he's arguing for something much more radical. When you're not constantly distracted by anxiety about results or fantasies about rewards, you can actually perform at a much higher level. Think about athletes in what they call the zone. They're not thinking about winning or losing. They're completely absorbed in the pure execution of their craft. That's karma yoga in action. Krishna also introduces the concept of dharma, which is often translated as duty, but it's much richer than that. Dharma is about understanding your unique role and responsibilities in the larger web of life. For Arjuna, his dharma was to be a warrior and fight for justice. For you, it might be being a parent, a teacher, a doctor, or an entrepreneur. The key insight is that when you align your actions with your dharma and perform them without attachment to personal gain, you're not just doing a job, you're participating in the cosmic order itself. Let me share a modern example that illustrates this beautifully. There's a janitor at a hospital who, when asked about his job, doesn't say he cleans floors. He says he helps heal people. He understands that his meticulous attention to cleanliness creates an environment where healing can happen. He's not attached to being praised or recognized, but he takes immense pride in knowing that his work serves something larger than himself. Every mop stroke, every sanitized surface is an act of service. That's the spirit of karma yoga. But Krishna goes even deeper. He explains that when we act with this spirit of selfless service, we begin to purify our minds and hearts. All those mental patterns of anxiety, greed, ego, and comparison that normally cloud our judgment start to dissolve. We become more creative, more intuitive, more effective. It's like the difference between muddy water and clear water, the same water, but one allows you to see clearly to the bottom while the other obscures everything. As we wrap up today's exploration, I want you to consider this question. What would your work life look like if you approached it as a form of worship, as a way of serving something greater than your personal desires? What if your daily tasks became opportunities for spiritual growth rather than just means to an end? This is the revolutionary promise of karma yoga, that ordinary work, performed with the right attitude, becomes a path to extraordinary inner freedom. Next time, we'll explore how this philosophy connects to the deeper mysteries of knowledge and wisdom. But for now, why not experiment with bringing this spirit of selfless action to whatever task is waiting for you today? Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite coffee in hand, and I'm about to share something that might just change how you see everything. We're diving into one of the most profound concepts from the Bhagavad Gita today, divine knowledge, or what the ancient text calls jnana. But before you think this is going to be some abstract philosophical lecture, Let me tell you why this matters to your Monday morning commute, your relationship struggles, and that decision you've been putting off for weeks. Krishna, speaking to Arjuna on that battlefield thousands of years ago, wasn't just talking about some mystical, otherworldly wisdom. He was describing a completely different way of seeing reality, like switching from a blurry old television to a crystal-clear 4K display. Suddenly, everything that seemed confusing becomes clear. Everything that felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Think about the last time you were really stressed about something. Maybe it was a work deadline, a relationship issue, or financial pressure. In that moment, your world probably felt like it was closing in, right? That's what Krishna calls ordinary understanding, when we're trapped in our limited perspective, seeing only the immediate problem, feeling like we're the center of the universe and everything depends on our frantic efforts. Now imagine if you could step back and see that same situation from a much wider angle, understanding how it fits into the bigger picture of your life, your growth, your purpose. That shift in perspective, that's a taste of divine knowledge. But here's where it gets really interesting. Krishna explains that this isn't just about having more information or being smarter. It's about fundamentally changing the lens through which you view existence. He uses this beautiful metaphor of a lamp in a windless place. When the flame is steady and undisturbed, it illuminates everything around it perfectly. Our ordinary minds are like lamps flickering in a hurricane, casting shadows everywhere, making everything look distorted and frightening. Let me share a story that might make this clearer. There's a woman I know who spent years climbing the corporate ladder, working 18-hour days, sacrificing her health and relationships, absolutely convinced that the next promotion would finally make her happy. She had all the ordinary knowledge, MBA, industry expertise, networking skills, but she was miserable. Then, during a particularly brutal period, something shifted. She began to see that her relentless pursuit wasn't actually about success. It was about fear, about proving her worth, about filling an emptiness inside. This deeper understanding, this seeing beyond the surface drama, transformed everything. She didn't quit her job or move to a monastery, but her relationship with work, with herself, with life itself became completely different. This is what Krishna means when he talks about seeing the eternal and the temporary, the unchanging truth beneath the constantly changing surface of life. It's like being caught in a movie and suddenly remembering you're sitting in a theater. The drama is still happening on screen, but you're no longer completely lost in it. Now think about this. How often do we get caught up in the story our minds are telling us about who we are, what we need to be happy, what's wrong with our lives? Divine knowledge isn't about having all the answers, it's about questioning the questions themselves. It's about recognizing that the voice in your head that's constantly commenting, judging, worrying, and planning isn't actually you. It's more like a radio that's been left on, and you've forgotten you can change the station. Krishna describes this awakening as seeing your true nature, not the role you play, not your achievements or failures, not even your thoughts and emotions, but the awareness that witnesses all of these things. It's like discovering that you're not the waves on the ocean's surface, constantly rising and falling, but the deep, calm water beneath that remains unchanged no matter how wild the storm gets above. But here's the practical magic of this understanding. When you stop identifying so completely with your temporary circumstances, you can respond to life from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. That difficult conversation with your boss becomes less about protecting your ego and more about finding a solution. That conflict with your partner becomes less about being right and more about understanding. That financial setback becomes less about personal failure and more about an opportunity to reassess and adapt. The beautiful paradox Krishna reveals is that when you stop grasping so tightly at life, when you stop trying to control every outcome, you actually become more effective, more creative, more alive. It's like learning to swim. The more you panic and fight the water, the more likely you are to sink. But when you relax and trust, you float naturally. As we wrap up today's exploration, Remember that divine knowledge isn't something you achieve once and keep forever. It's more like a muscle you develop through practice, through paying attention, through choosing again and again to see beyond the surface drama of daily life to the deeper truth that connects us all. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising between us, and I'm about to share something that might completely change how you think about letting go. You know that feeling when someone tells you to just relax when you're stressed, and it makes you want to scream? Well, the Bhagavad Gita has something far more profound to offer about the art of letting go, and it's not what you might expect. Krishna introduces Arjuna to one of the most revolutionary concepts in all of spiritual literature: renunciation in action. Now, before you start thinking this means becoming a monk or giving up everything you love, let me paint you a different picture. Imagine a master chef in the middle of the dinner rush. She's completely absorbed in her work, every movement precise and purposeful, yet she's not attached to whether the critics will love her dish or whether the restaurant will get a 5-star review. She's fully engaged but internally free. That's renunciation in action. Krishna tells Arjuna something that sounds almost contradictory at first. You can be completely involved in the world while being completely detached from the results. Think about this for a moment. How often do we hold back from giving our all because we're afraid of failure? Or conversely, how often do we burn ourselves out because we're so desperate for a particular outcome? The Gita suggests there's a third way, a path that lets us engage fully while remaining internally spacious. Here's where it gets really interesting. Krishna uses the metaphor of the lotus leaf, which sits on water but never gets wet. The leaf doesn't reject the water or try to escape from it. It simply has a natural quality that keeps it from being saturated. This is what our relationship with action can become. We don't need to retreat from life or become passive observers. Instead, we can develop this lotus-like quality where we're present and engaged but not drowning in attachment to outcomes. Let me share a story that might resonate with your own experience. There's a woman I know who spent years as a perfectionist lawyer, working 18-hour days, measuring her worth by every case she won or lost. She was successful by external standards but miserable inside. Then she discovered this principle from the Gita. She didn't quit law or become less dedicated to her clients. Instead, she learned to pour herself completely into the preparation and presentation of each case while releasing her grip on the verdict. Paradoxically, she became both more effective and more peaceful. Her clients could feel the difference in her presence, and she found joy in the work itself rather than just in winning. Now you might be wondering, doesn't this lead to apathy? If we're not attached to results, won't we stop caring? This is where Krishna's wisdom becomes truly subtle. He distinguishes between detachment and indifference. Indifference is cold and withdrawn. Detachment is warm and engaged. Think of a skilled surgeon who cares deeply about her patient's well-being but doesn't let emotional attachment interfere with the precision required for the operation. She's simultaneously caring and detached, involved and free. The practical application of this wisdom extends into every corner of modern life. Consider parenting, for instance. We can love our children completely, guide them with all our wisdom, and create the best environment we can for their growth, while simultaneously releasing our attachment to who they become or what choices they make. This doesn't mean we become passive or uninvolved parents. It means we parent from a place of love rather than fear, presence rather than projection. Krishna reveals that this kind of action, performed without attachment to results, actually becomes a form of offering. When we work, create, or serve without the constant mental commentary of "what's in it for me?" or "how will this make me look?" our actions take on a different quality. They become expressions of something larger than our personal agenda. The accountant balancing books becomes a steward of order. The teacher explaining concepts becomes a channel for understanding. The artist creating becomes a conduit for beauty. This principle transforms even mundane activities. Washing dishes can become a meditation when we're fully present to the warm water, the soap bubbles, the simple satisfaction of cleaning, without rushing toward the moment when we're done. The dishwashing itself becomes the point, not just a means to an end. As we wrap up our conversation today, I want you to consider this question. What would change in your life if you could engage fully in your work, relationships, and dreams while holding the outcomes lightly? The Gita suggests that this isn't just possible, but is actually the secret to both effectiveness and peace. It's not about caring less. It's about caring differently. And perhaps that's the most practical wisdom we can carry from this ancient text into our very modern lives. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, trying to focus on something important, but your mind keeps wandering to your phone, that conversation from yesterday, what you need to buy at the grocery store, and whether you remembered to lock your front door. Sound familiar? Well, this exact struggle is what Krishna addresses when he talks to Arjuna about meditation and self-control in the Bhagavad Gita. And honestly, it's like he's speaking directly to our modern, distracted lives. Krishna doesn't sugarcoat it when he tells Arjuna that the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong. Think about that for a moment. He's basically saying that trying to control your mind is like trying to control the wind. Have you ever tried to meditate and found your thoughts bouncing around like a hyperactive squirrel? That's exactly what Krishna is talking about. But here's the beautiful thing about this ancient wisdom. It doesn't just acknowledge the problem, it gives us a roadmap to work with it. The Gita introduces us to this fascinating concept of yoga, which literally means union or connection. But we're not talking about the Instagram-worthy poses here. Krishna is talking about the yoga of the mind, the discipline of bringing our scattered attention into focus. He explains that meditation isn't about emptying your mind completely. That's actually impossible and not even the goal. Instead, it's about training your attention like you train a muscle at the gym. Every time your mind wanders and you gently bring it back to your chosen focus, that's actually a successful moment in meditation, not a failure. Now think about this. Krishna uses this incredible metaphor of a lamp in a windless place. When there's no wind, the flame burns steady and still. That's what a trained mind looks like in meditation. But most of us are living in a hurricane of distractions, notifications, deadlines, and endless mental chatter. The practice Krishna describes is about finding that windless place within ourselves, even when the world around us is chaotic. What's really practical about Krishna's approach is that he doesn't expect us to become hermits or renounce the world. He talks about moderation in everything: eating, sleeping, recreation, and work. It's like he's saying, look, you can't meditate your way out of an unbalanced life. If you're staying up until 3 in the morning binge-watching shows, then trying to meditate at 6 in the morning, you're setting yourself up for struggle. The foundation of mental discipline starts with how we live our daily lives. Here's where it gets really interesting for our modern world. Krishna explains that the person who has achieved self-control sees the same divine essence in everyone, whether it's a wise teacher, a homeless person, or even someone who's treated them badly. Imagine having that kind of inner stability. Think about the last time someone cut you off in traffic or was rude to you at work. What if your inner peace was so solid that these external situations couldn't shake your fundamental sense of well-being? The Gita describes this state as being like a person who's completely satisfied from within. They're not constantly seeking validation from social media likes, not dependent on external circumstances to feel good about themselves, not thrown off course by criticism or even praise. It's not that they become emotionless robots, but rather that their emotional responses come from a place of choice rather than reactive patterns. Krishna also addresses something we all struggle with, the gap between knowing what's good for us and actually doing it. We know we should exercise, eat better, be more patient with our family, spend less time on our phones, but knowledge alone doesn't create change. This is where the discipline of practice comes in. The Gita suggests that transformation happens through consistent, patient effort over time, not through dramatic overnight changes. One of the most encouraging things Krishna tells Arjuna is that even a little bit of this practice protects you from great fear and suffering. You don't have to become a meditation master overnight. Even 5 minutes of genuine practice, of training your attention, of choosing your responses rather than just reacting, creates real benefits in your life. As we wrap up this exploration of meditation and self-control, remember that Krishna isn't asking us to suppress our humanity or become perfect. He's offering us tools to work skillfully with our minds, to find that place of inner stability that no external circumstance can shake. In our next conversation, we'll dive into how these principles apply when we're facing difficult decisions and moral dilemmas, because that's where the real test of our practice begins. Picture this. You're sitting with your morning coffee, and someone asks you the ultimate question that's been haunting humanity forever. What is truth? Not just any truth, but the absolute, ultimate truth that underlies everything. Well, grab that cup a little tighter, because we're about to dive into one of the most profound sections of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna reveals to Arjuna what it means to truly know the absolute. Now think about this for a moment. We live in an age where everyone claims to have the truth, don't we? Social media feeds are flooded with people declaring their version of reality as the only valid one. Politicians promise they have the truth. Influencers sell us their truth. But Krishna is talking about something entirely different here. He's talking about direct realization, not intellectual understanding. It's like the difference between reading about swimming and actually jumping into the water. Krishna explains to Arjuna that knowing the absolute isn't like cramming for an exam where you memorize facts and figures. It's more like learning to see clearly after wearing foggy glasses your entire life. Imagine you've been looking at the world through a dirty windshield, and suddenly someone cleans it completely. The world was always there, but now you can actually see it. That's what direct realization feels like. It's not gaining new information. It's removing the obstacles to seeing what was always present. Here's where it gets really interesting. Krishna describes how most of us mistake the temporary for the eternal, the changing for the unchanging. Think about your own life for a second. How often do you find yourself desperately chasing things that you think will bring you lasting happiness? That promotion, that relationship, that perfect vacation, that new gadget. But what happens? You get them, feel good for a while, and then you're back to seeking something else. It's like trying to quench your thirst with salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. The absolute that Krishna speaks of is like the ocean beneath the waves. The waves are constantly changing, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, sometimes playful, sometimes destructive. But the ocean itself, that remains constant, vast, and deep. We spend our lives focused on the waves, getting tossed around by them, when we could be resting in the awareness of the ocean itself. Now, you might be wondering, how does this direct realization actually happen? Krishna isn't talking about some mystical experience reserved for cave-dwelling hermits. He's talking about a shift in perspective that can happen right here, right now, in the middle of your perfectly ordinary life. It's like suddenly realizing that you've been looking for your glasses while they were on your head the whole time. The truth wasn't hidden, you were just looking in the wrong direction. Consider this beautiful analogy Krishna offers. Imagine the sun is always shining, but sometimes clouds cover it. The clouds don't diminish the sun's brightness, they just temporarily obscure our view of it. Our thoughts, emotions, fears, and desires are like those clouds. They're not bad or wrong, but when we mistake them for our true nature, we lose sight of the brilliant awareness that's always present. What makes this teaching so revolutionary is that Krishna isn't asking Arjuna to become something he isn't. He's pointing out what Arjuna already is, beneath all the confusion and conflict. It's like telling someone who's been dreaming that they're a beggar that they can wake up and remember they're actually royalty. The royalty was never lost, it was just forgotten. In our modern context, this wisdom feels incredibly relevant. We live in a world that's constantly trying to convince us that we're lacking something, that we need to improve, upgrade, optimize ourselves. But what if the deepest truth is that we're already complete? What if all our seeking is just a case of mistaken identity? It's like spending your whole life trying to become water when you've been water all along. The beauty of direct realization is that it's not dependent on circumstances. You don't need to be in a perfect mood, have all your problems solved, or be sitting in a meditation retreat in the Himalayas. Krishna suggests that this recognition can dawn in the middle of a battlefield, in the midst of the greatest crisis of your life. Because the absolute isn't something separate from the relative world, it's the very ground of being from which all experiences arise. As we move forward in our exploration of the Gita, keep this understanding close to your heart. The truth Krishna speaks of isn't something you need to achieve or attain, it's something you need to recognize. And that recognition can transform not just how you see yourself, but how you engage with every moment of your beautifully ordinary, extraordinarily sacred life. Picture this. You're sitting with your morning coffee, watching the steam rise from your cup, and suddenly you find yourself wondering about something profound. What is it that remains constant in this ever-changing world? Your coffee will get cold, the steam will disappear, your thoughts will shift to the day ahead, but is there something eternal that underlies all of this constant change? This is exactly the question that the Bhagavad Gita addresses when it speaks of the imperishable Brahman, the eternal foundation of everything that exists. Now think about this for a moment. In our daily lives, we're surrounded by things that come and go. Your smartphone will eventually break, your favorite coffee shop might close down, even the mountains outside your window are slowly being reshaped by wind and rain. Everything we can see, touch, and experience seems to be in a constant state of flux. But the Gita suggests there's something deeper, something that never changes, never deteriorates, never disappears. This is Brahman, and understanding it might just change how you see everything around you. Let me share a story that Krishna tells Arjuna to illustrate this concept. Imagine a movie theater where countless films are being projected on a screen. The movies change, the characters come and go, stories unfold and conclude, but the screen itself remains untouched. It doesn't become the romantic comedy or the action thriller that's playing on it. The screen is always there, providing the foundation for all these different experiences, yet it remains pure and unchanged. This screen is like Brahman, the eternal consciousness that underlies all of existence. But here's where it gets really interesting for us modern folks. When Krishna speaks of the imperishable Brahman, he's not talking about some distant, abstract concept that only philosophers need to worry about. He's pointing to something incredibly practical and immediate. Think about your own experience right now. You have thoughts flowing through your mind, emotions rising and falling, sensations in your body, but there's something that's aware of all these changing experiences. That awareness itself doesn't seem to change, does it? It's like the space in which all your experiences happen. Consider this analogy. Your consciousness is like the sky, and your thoughts and emotions are like clouds passing through it. The clouds come and go. Sometimes they're dark and stormy, sometimes light and fluffy, but the sky itself remains vast and unaffected. Even when it seems completely covered by clouds, the sky is still there, unchanged. This unchanging awareness, this space of consciousness, is your connection to that eternal Brahman that Krishna describes. Now you might be wondering, how does this ancient wisdom apply to your everyday life? Well, here's something fascinating. When you really understand this concept, it starts to shift how you relate to both success and failure, joy and sorrow. If you're that unchanging awareness, then you're not ultimately defined by whether you get the promotion, whether your relationship works out, or whether your latest project succeeds. You're something much more fundamental and unshakable. I remember reading about a woman who lost her job during the pandemic. Initially, she was devastated because she had completely identified herself with her role as a marketing executive. But as she began to understand these principles, she realized that her true identity wasn't her job title or her professional achievements. She was the consciousness that had experienced being a marketing executive, but she wasn't limited to that role. This understanding gave her the freedom to explore new possibilities, without the crushing weight of thinking her worth depended on external circumstances. The Gita explains that this imperishable Brahman is not separate from you or me or anyone else. It's not like there's some cosmic entity sitting somewhere in the heavens. Rather, it's the very essence of what we are. When you strip away all the labels, all the roles you play, all the stories you tell about yourself, what remains? That pure awareness, that sense of I am, that has been constant throughout your entire life from childhood to now, that's your connection to the eternal. But here's the beautiful paradox that the Gita presents. While this Brahman is imperishable and eternal, it's also intimately present in every moment of change. It's like how water can take the form of ice, steam, or liquid, but its essential nature as H2O never changes. The eternal expresses itself through the temporary, the unchanging dances as the ever-changing world we experience. As we wrap up this exploration of the imperishable Brahman, I want you to consider this practical takeaway. The next time you find yourself caught up in the drama of daily life, whether it's stress at work, relationship challenges, or uncertainty about the future, remember that there's something in you that's untouchable by all of this turbulence. You are both the wave and the ocean, both the temporary experience and the eternal awareness that witnesses it all. This understanding doesn't make you passive or detached from life. Instead, it gives you an unshakable foundation from which to engage fully and authentically with whatever life brings your way. Picture yourself sitting across from someone who's about to share the most profound secret they've ever discovered. That's exactly what happens in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna unveils what he calls royal knowledge, the supreme secret of spiritual wisdom. Now, you might wonder, what makes this knowledge so royal, so secret? Well, grab your coffee and settle in, because we're about to explore wisdom that has the power to completely transform how you see yourself and the world around you. Krishna begins this conversation with Arjuna by saying something remarkable. I'm going to share with you the most confidential knowledge, because you're devoted and free from envy. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever noticed how the deepest truths in life are often shared only with those we trust? A master craftsman doesn't reveal his finest techniques to just anyone. A grandmother doesn't share her secret recipe with every neighbor. Krishna understands that this royal knowledge requires a receptive heart, not just an analytical mind. So what exactly is this supreme secret? It's the understanding that the entire universe is pervaded by an invisible, imperishable presence, what Krishna calls the unmanifest form of the divine. Now, before your eyes glaze over thinking this is some abstract philosophical concept, let me paint you a picture that might make this incredibly practical and real. Imagine you're walking through a forest. You see individual trees, rocks, streams, birds, and countless other forms. But what you're really experiencing is one interconnected ecosystem where everything is sustained by the same underlying life force. The nutrients flowing through the soil, the oxygen cycling through the atmosphere, the energy from the sun powering it all. There's an invisible web of connection that makes everything possible. Krishna is saying that this same principle applies to all of existence, but on an infinitely grander scale. Here's where it gets fascinating and deeply personal. Krishna explains that all beings exist within this divine presence, but this presence doesn't exist within them in the way we might expect. It's like how space contains everything, your house, your neighborhood, your entire city, but space itself isn't contained by any of these things. Now, think about this in your own life. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every emotion you feel is happening within this vast, conscious presence, yet that presence remains completely free and unaffected by your personal dramas and struggles. This understanding becomes incredibly liberating when you really grasp it. You know those moments when you feel completely overwhelmed by life's challenges, when you're convinced that your problems are the center of the universe. This royal knowledge offers a completely different perspective. Your difficulties are real and valid, but they're happening within something infinitely larger and more stable than your temporary circumstances. Krishna then shares something that might sound contradictory at first. He says that while he pervades everything, he's also not bound by anything. It's like how the wind moves through countless spaces, but isn't contaminated or limited by what it touches. The wind that blows through a garbage dump is the same wind that caresses a rose garden, yet the wind itself remains pure and free. But here's where Krishna really challenges our conventional thinking. He explains that people often miss this divine presence because they're too focused on temporary forms and phenomena. It's like being so mesmerized by the waves that you forget about the ocean beneath them. We get caught up in the endless drama of names, forms, success, failure, pleasure, and pain, while missing the unchanging awareness in which all these experiences arise and dissolve. Think about your own life for a moment. How often do you find yourself completely identified with your role, your achievements, your relationships, or your problems? It's natural and human, but Krishna is pointing to something that remains constant through all these changing identities, the pure consciousness that observes all these experiences. Now, you might be wondering, what's the practical value of understanding this? Krishna explains that those who truly grasp this royal knowledge develop what he calls divine nature. They become naturally compassionate, fearless, and free from anxiety, because they're no longer trying to control outcomes from a place of ego and separation. They understand their true identity as expressions of this infinite consciousness. This doesn't mean becoming passive or detached from life. Rather, it means engaging fully while remaining rooted in something deeper than your personal story. It's like an actor who gives their all to a performance while never forgetting they're playing a role. As we move deeper into the Gita's wisdom, this royal knowledge becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Understanding your true nature as consciousness itself, rather than just a temporary body-mind experiencing consciousness, changes everything about how you approach relationships, work, challenges, and even death itself. This is the secret that transforms ordinary living into something truly extraordinary. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite cafe, steam rising from your coffee cup, and a friend leans in to share something that completely shifts how you see the world. That's exactly what Krishna does for Arjuna in one of the most breathtaking chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, when he reveals the profound truth about divine manifestations and how the sacred permeates every single aspect of existence. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you truly saw something as sacred? Maybe it was watching a sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, or holding a newborn baby, or even witnessing an act of unexpected kindness between strangers. Krishna tells Arjuna that this sense of awe we feel isn't just a fleeting emotion. It's actually our soul recognizing the divine presence that exists in all forms of life. It's like suddenly realizing that the ordinary world you've been walking through your entire life has been a temple all along. Krishna begins by explaining that while the divine is present everywhere, it manifests most clearly in certain forms and phenomena. He's not saying the divine plays favorites, but rather that some expressions of life are so magnificent, so perfectly aligned with their purpose, that they serve as windows into the infinite. Think of it like this. Imagine the divine as sunlight. The sun shines equally on everything, but some surfaces, like a perfectly still lake or a crystal, reflect that light so brilliantly that they become almost blinding in their beauty. He gives Arjuna a stunning list of these divine manifestations, and here's where it gets really fascinating. Among the gods, Krishna says he is Vishnu. Among bodies of water, he is the ocean. Among mountains, he is Mount Meru. Among trees, he is the sacred fig tree. But then he goes further into realms that might surprise you. Among warriors, he is Rama. Among fish, he is the shark. Among birds, he is Garuda, the great eagle. Even among the letters of the alphabet, he declares himself to be the sacred sound Om. Now, what's Krishna really telling us here? He's revealing that excellence, power, beauty, and purpose in any form are reflections of the divine nature. When you watch a master chef create a perfect dish, when you see an athlete perform at the peak of human capability, when you witness a teacher illuminate a complex concept with perfect clarity, you're actually witnessing divine manifestation in action. The sacred isn't confined to temples and meditation halls. It's flowing through every expression of life at its highest potential. But here's where this teaching becomes deeply practical for our modern lives. Krishna isn't asking us to worship every tree or bow down to every mountain. Instead, he's training our perception. He's teaching us to develop what we might call sacred vision, the ability to recognize the divine thread that weaves through all existence. When you start seeing this way, everything changes. That difficult colleague at work becomes a soul on their own journey. The challenges you face become opportunities for growth and service. Even the mundane moments, washing dishes or stuck in traffic, become chances to practice presence and gratitude. Think about how this applies to our relationship with nature. Krishna mentions that among seasons, he is spring, the time of renewal and blossoming. When we truly understand this, environmental protection stops being just a political issue and becomes a spiritual practice. We're not just saving trees, we're honoring divine manifestations. We're not just reducing pollution, we're maintaining the sacred spaces where the divine reveals itself most clearly. This teaching also revolutionizes how we see other people. Krishna explains that among human qualities, he is the strength of the strong, the intelligence of the intelligent, the devotion of the devoted. This means that every person you meet carries some unique divine quality. Your job isn't to judge or compare, but to recognize and honor whatever divine manifestation is expressing itself through them. The compassionate nurse, the dedicated teacher, the honest mechanic, the loving parent, they're all channels through which the sacred flows into the world. Perhaps most powerfully, Krishna reveals that he is time itself, the force that creates, sustains, and transforms everything. This isn't meant to terrify us, but to help us understand that change and impermanence aren't obstacles to the sacred, they are the sacred in motion. When we resist change, we're actually resisting the divine flow. When we embrace life's constant transformation, we align ourselves with the deepest spiritual truth. As we wrap up our exploration of divine manifestations, remember that Krishna's ultimate message is both humbling and empowering. You don't need to become something other than what you are to connect with the divine. Instead, you need to become fully, authentically, excellently what you already are. Whether you're a parent, an artist, a student, or a dreamer, your highest expression of that role is your unique way of manifesting the sacred in this world. And that, my friend, is a truth worth savoring with your next sip of coffee. You know how sometimes you're watching a movie, and suddenly the camera pulls back to reveal that what you thought was the entire world was actually just one tiny corner of something unimaginably vast. That moment of perspective shift, that sudden realization of scale, is exactly what happens to Arjuna in one of the most mind-bending chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. We've been following this warrior's crisis of conscience on the battlefield, but now Krishna is about to blow his mind completely by showing him the cosmic vision, a glimpse of infinite reality that will forever change how we think about our place in the universe. Picture this scene with me. Arjuna has been asking Krishna all these profound questions about duty, purpose, and the nature of existence. He's been getting these beautiful philosophical answers, but there's still this nagging doubt in his mind. It's like when someone describes the most incredible sunset to you, but you haven't actually seen it yourself. You can appreciate the description, but something's still missing, right? That's where Arjuna finds himself. So he does what any of us would do in his situation. He asks for proof. He says, essentially, Krishna, if you really are the divine, if you really are the source of all existence, then show me. Let me see this cosmic form you keep talking about. Now think about this for a moment. How many times in our lives do we ask for signs, for some kind of direct experience of the bigger picture? We're dealing with a difficult decision, or we're going through a tough time, and we find ourselves saying, "Universe, just give me a sign. Show me what I need to see." Arjuna's request is the ultimate version of this very human plea. But here's where things get interesting, and honestly, a little terrifying. Krishna grants Arjuna's wish, But first he has to give him divine eyes because, as Krishna explains, you can't see infinite reality with ordinary vision. It's like trying to look at the sun with your naked eyes, or attempting to download the entire internet onto a calculator. The hardware simply isn't equipped for it. So Krishna gives Arjuna this supernatural sight, and what Arjuna sees next is beyond anything we could imagine. He sees Krishna's cosmic form, and it's not the beautiful, peaceful figure he's been talking to. Instead, he witnesses something that contains everything, literally everything that has ever existed or ever will exist. Imagine looking at a person and suddenly seeing not just them, but every moment of their life simultaneously, every thought they've ever had, every cell in their body, every atom, every quantum particle, all existing at once. Now multiply that by every person who has ever lived, every star, every planet, every grain of sand, every idea, every emotion, all happening simultaneously in one infinite form. That's what Arjuna is experiencing. The text describes Krishna's cosmic form as having thousands of faces, thousands of arms, wearing celestial garments, adorned with divine ornaments. But these aren't just poetic metaphors. This is Vyasa's attempt to describe the indescribable. It's like trying to explain color to someone who's never seen, or describing music to someone who's never heard. The language breaks down because we're dealing with something beyond the scope of normal human experience. What really gets to me about this passage is Arjuna's reaction. At first, he's filled with wonder and amazement. He's seeing the source of all creation, the cosmic dance of existence itself. But then, as the vision continues, he becomes terrified. He sees not just the creative aspect of the divine, but also the destructive aspect. He witnesses time itself, devouring everything, and he realizes that this cosmic form is showing him all the warriors on the battlefield being consumed by time's relentless march. This is where the vision becomes deeply personal and practical for our modern lives. Arjuna is seeing what we might call the ultimate perspective. You know how when you're stressed about a deadline at work, and then you look up at the night sky, and suddenly your problems feel smaller? Arjuna is getting the cosmic version of that experience. He's seeing that everything he's worried about, everything he thinks is so important, is part of a much larger pattern that's been unfolding for eternity. But here's the beautiful paradox that emerges from this terrifying vision. Instead of making individual action meaningless, this cosmic perspective actually gives it deeper meaning. When Arjuna sees that the outcome of the battle is already woven into the fabric of time itself, he realizes that his role isn't to control the results, but to participate consciously in the cosmic dance. It's like being an actor who suddenly understands not just their own lines, but the entire play, the theater, the audience, and their place in the grand performance of existence. This cosmic vision teaches us something profound about our own daily struggles and decisions. We're all part of something infinitely larger than ourselves, yet our individual choices and actions matter deeply within that larger pattern. Picture this. You're sitting with a close friend who's going through a really tough time, and they keep asking you the same question over and over again. What should I do? What's the right thing here? Now imagine that friend is a warrior prince standing on a battlefield, paralyzed by doubt, and you happen to be the embodiment of divine wisdom itself. That's exactly the scene we find ourselves in, as we dive deeper into one of the most beautiful and transformative teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, the path of devotion and surrender. You know, there's something almost rebellious about what Krishna is about to teach Arjuna here. Think about it. We live in a world that constantly tells us to take control, to be self-made, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We're bombarded with messages about being independent, strong, and never showing vulnerability. But here comes this ancient wisdom, thousands of years old, suggesting something completely different. Krishna is essentially saying, what if the secret to real strength isn't holding on tighter, but actually learning how to let go? Now, when we talk about devotion in the Gita, We're not talking about blind faith or passive resignation. This isn't about becoming a doormat or abandoning your responsibilities. Krishna makes this crystal clear to Arjuna. He's talking about something much more sophisticated, a conscious choice to align yourself with something greater than your limited perspective. It's like the difference between a river fighting against its banks and a river flowing naturally toward the ocean. Both involve movement, but one is exhausting and futile, while the other is powerful and purposeful. Let me share something that might make this clearer. Have you ever been in a situation where you were trying so hard to control every detail that you actually made things worse? Maybe you were planning a perfect vacation, micromanaging every moment, only to find that the best parts of the trip were the unexpected detours you couldn't have planned. Or perhaps you've experienced that moment in a relationship where you finally stopped trying to change the other person and just accepted them as they were. And suddenly, the relationship actually improved. That's a glimpse of what Krishna is pointing toward. The beautiful thing about devotional surrender is that it doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you incredibly strong. Think about a master musician playing a complex piece. Are they being controlled by the music, or are they controlling it? Neither, really. They're in complete harmony with it. They've surrendered their ego's need to force every note and instead allowed themselves to become a channel for something beautiful to flow through them. That's the kind of surrender Krishna is talking about. But here's where it gets really practical for our modern lives. Krishna isn't asking Arjuna to abandon his duty as a warrior or to run away from his responsibilities. Instead, he's teaching him how to act from a place of love rather than fear, from connection rather than separation. When you're operating from this space of devotional surrender, your actions become more effective, not less. You're not paralyzed by the anxiety of trying to control outcomes you can't actually control anyway. Consider how this plays out in everyday situations. When you're having a difficult conversation with someone you love, you can approach it from ego trying to win, to be right, to protect your image. Or you can approach it from devotion, genuinely caring about the relationship and the other person's well-being. Which approach do you think leads to better outcomes? When you're facing a challenge at work, you can attack it from a place of fear and self-interest, or you can approach it as an opportunity to serve something larger than yourself. The difference in both your experience and your results is remarkable. Krishna uses the most beautiful metaphor for this kind of devotion. He talks about offering everything, your actions, your thoughts, even your food, as a sacred gift. Imagine living your life as if everything you do is an offering of love. Not because you have to, but because you recognize that you're part of something magnificent and interconnected. Your morning coffee becomes a moment of gratitude. Your work becomes an act of service. Even your struggles become opportunities to deepen your trust and compassion. This path of devotion also dissolves one of the biggest sources of human suffering, the exhausting burden of thinking you have to figure everything out alone. When you're connected to something larger than your individual will, you can act with confidence even when you don't have all the answers. You can make decisions from wisdom rather than worry. You can love without guarantees and give without keeping score. As we continue exploring Krishna's teachings, remember that this wisdom isn't meant to be understood just intellectually. It's meant to be lived, experienced, and embodied. The path of devotion and surrender is ultimately an invitation to remember who you really are beneath all the roles and stories, a conscious being capable of infinite love, connected to everything and everyone around you. And that, my friend, changes everything about how you show up in the world. Welcome back to another cup of coffee and ancient wisdom. If you've been following along with us through the Gita, you've probably noticed that Krishna has this wonderful way of building his teachings like a master architect, each concept laying the foundation for something even deeper. Today, we're diving into what might be one of the most fascinating chapters in the entire text, where Krishna introduces us to what he calls the field of activity, and helps us understand the fundamental relationship between consciousness and matter. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop right now, watching the world around you. There's the barista making drinks, customers chatting, steam rising from cups, the gentle hum of conversation mixing with the aroma of freshly ground beans. Now, here's a question that might sound simple but opens up an entire universe of understanding. What exactly are you experiencing? Are you the observer watching all this activity, or are you part of the field itself? This is precisely what Krishna begins to unpack for Arjuna in this remarkable section. He introduces a concept that's both elegantly simple and profoundly deep. The idea that everything we experience can be understood through two fundamental aspects, the field and the knower of the field. Think of it this way. Imagine your life as a vast garden. The garden itself, the soil, the plants, the weather, all the activity happening within it, that's what Krishna calls the field. But then there's something else, isn't there? There's the awareness that knows the garden exists, that experiences its beauty, that recognizes the changing seasons. That awareness, that consciousness which observes and knows, that's what he calls the knower of the field. Now you might be thinking, this sounds pretty abstract. What does this have to do with my daily life? Well, let me share something that happened to me just last week. I was stuck in traffic, feeling frustrated, my mind racing with all the things I needed to get done. Suddenly, I remembered this very teaching from the Gita. I realized that all my frustration, the traffic, my racing thoughts, even my physical sensations of tension, all of that was happening in what Krishna would call the field. But there was something in me that was simply aware of all this chaos, something that could observe my frustration without being completely consumed by it. That awareness, that witness consciousness, that was the knower of the field. Krishna goes on to explain that the field includes absolutely everything we typically think of as our experience, our body, our emotions, our thoughts, our desires, our environment, other people, basically all the material and psychological phenomena that make up what we call life. It's like a cosmic movie screen where the entire drama of existence plays out. But here's where it gets really interesting. Just as a movie screen remains unchanged whether it's showing a comedy or a tragedy, the knower of the field, pure consciousness, remains constant and unaffected by whatever appears within it. Think about your own experience for a moment. When you were 5 years old, your body was completely different, your thoughts were different, your entire personality was different. Yet somehow, there's a continuous sense of you that has remained constant through all these changes. That's a glimpse of what Krishna is pointing toward, the eternal witness that observes the ever-changing field of experience. But Krishna doesn't stop there. He explains that most of our suffering comes from a case of mistaken identity. We confuse ourselves with the field instead of recognizing ourselves as the knower. It's like an actor becoming so absorbed in their role that they forget they're acting. We become so identified with our thoughts, emotions, circumstances, and even our bodies, that we lose touch with our essential nature as pure awareness. Here's a practical example that might resonate with you. Have you ever noticed how your mood can completely shift based on external circumstances? Maybe you receive some bad news and suddenly feel like your whole world is crashing down. Or perhaps you get a promotion and feel on top of the world. In both cases, Krishna would say, you're identifying with the field, with the temporary circumstances and emotions, rather than resting in your identity as the unchanging knower. This understanding has profound implications for how we live our lives. When we recognize that we are fundamentally the witness consciousness rather than the temporary phenomena we witness, we begin to experience what Krishna calls true freedom. We can fully engage with life, feel our emotions, pursue our goals, love deeply, but without the desperate attachment that comes from thinking our happiness depends entirely on how things turn out in the field. As we wrap up today's exploration, I want you to carry this question with you. Throughout your day, can you notice the difference between the ever-changing content of your experience and the steady awareness that knows it all? It's not about becoming detached from life, but rather about discovering an unshakable foundation of peace that exists regardless of what's happening around you. Next time, we'll explore how this understanding transforms our relationship with action and purpose. But for now, let this marinate like a good cup of coffee, and see what insights emerge from simply paying attention to the field and its knower. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching the world go by through the window. You notice someone rushing past, clearly stressed and agitated, while another person walks slowly, almost sluggishly, barely lifting their feet. Then you see a third person moving with purpose and grace, balanced and alert. What you're witnessing, my friend, is the ancient wisdom of the three gunas playing out right before your eyes. The Bhagavad Gita introduces us to one of the most profound psychological frameworks ever conceived, thousands of years before modern psychology even existed. Krishna explains to Arjuna that everything in creation, including our own minds and personalities, is governed by three fundamental forces called gunas. Think of them as the primary colors of existence, except instead of red, blue, and yellow, we have rajas, tamas, and sattva. Now imagine your mind as a smartphone screen. Sometimes it's bright and clear, showing everything in vivid detail. That's sattva, the quality of clarity, balance, and wisdom. Other times the screen is frantically flickering between apps, notifications popping up everywhere, the battery draining fast from overactivity. That's rajas, the force of passion, movement, and restless energy. And then there are those moments when the screen goes dim, sluggish, unresponsive, like when your phone needs a restart. That's tamas, the quality of inertia, darkness, and confusion. Here's where it gets fascinating. Krishna isn't telling us that one guna is good and the others are bad. Instead, he's revealing that all three are necessary forces of nature, constantly interacting and shifting within us. Think about this for a moment. Even the most enlightened person experiences all three states. The key isn't to eliminate rajas and tamas, but to understand how they work and learn to cultivate more sattva in our daily lives. Let me paint you a picture of how these gunas show up in our modern world. Consider your relationship with social media. When you're in a rajasic state, you might find yourself endlessly scrolling, getting agitated by political posts, feeling compelled to argue in comment sections, your mind racing from one piece of information to another. You're active, yes, but it's the kind of activity that leaves you drained and scattered. Now contrast this with a tamasic approach to social media, where you mindlessly scroll for hours, not really absorbing anything, feeling increasingly lethargic and disconnected from reality, using it to avoid dealing with important responsibilities. But what would a sattvic relationship with social media look like? You might use it consciously, perhaps to connect meaningfully with friends, to learn something genuinely useful, or to share content that uplifts others. You're engaged but not attached, active but not agitated, present but not obsessed. The beautiful thing about Krishna's teaching is how practical it becomes once you start recognizing these patterns. Have you ever noticed how certain foods make you feel? A heavy, greasy meal might pull you into tamas, making you feel sluggish and cloudy. Excessive caffeine or sugar might spike you into rajas, creating jittery energy followed by a crash. But a balanced, fresh meal prepared with care tends to promote sattva, leaving you feeling energized yet calm, alert yet peaceful. This extends to every aspect of our lives. The music we listen to, the books we read, the conversations we have, even the time of day we wake up, all influence which guna predominates in our consciousness. Krishna suggests that by making conscious choices aligned with sattva, we naturally begin to experience more clarity, compassion, and wisdom in our daily lives. But here's a crucial insight that often gets overlooked. Krishna isn't advocating for a life of perpetual calm and balance. There are times when we need the passionate energy of rajas to get things done, to fight for what's right, to create and innovate. There are even times when the restful quality of tamas serves us, like when we need deep sleep or when we're processing grief. The wisdom lies in not being controlled by these forces, but in learning to dance with them consciously. Think of a skilled musician. They don't play every note at the same volume or tempo. They understand when to build intensity, when to create space, when to find the perfect balance. Similarly, understanding the gunas helps us become skilled musicians of our own consciousness, able to access the right quality of mind for each situation we encounter. As we move forward in our exploration of the Gita's wisdom, keep this framework of the three gunas in your back pocket. It's like having a map of human psychology that helps explain why we feel the way we feel, why we act the way we act, and most importantly, how we can gradually shift toward greater clarity and peace. The ancient sages discovered something profound about the nature of consciousness itself, and Krishna is sharing this treasure with us, one insight at a time. Picture this. You're sitting with your wisest friend, someone who's seen it all, experienced the highest peaks and the deepest valleys of human existence. They lean forward, coffee in hand, and say something that completely shifts how you see reality itself. That's exactly what happens when Krishna begins revealing the ultimate truth about the Supreme Person to Arjuna in this profound section of the Bhagavad Gita. Now think about this for a moment. In our daily lives, we're constantly caught between opposing forces, aren't we? Success and failure, joy and sorrow, praise and criticism. We ride this endless roller coaster, thinking that's just how life works. But what if I told you there's something beyond all these dualities? Something that remains perfectly unchanged whether you're having the best day of your life or facing your darkest hour. Krishna explains to Arjuna that there exists a supreme person who transcends all the pairs of opposites that govern our ordinary experience. This isn't some abstract philosophical concept floating in the clouds. This is the most practical wisdom you could ever receive. Imagine a lighthouse standing firm while storms rage around it. The waves crash, the winds howl, but the lighthouse remains steady, its light cutting through the darkness. That's the nature of this supreme person that Krishna describes. Here's where it gets really interesting. Krishna tells us that this supreme person isn't separate from creation, yet isn't limited by it either. Think of a master artist who pours their soul into a painting. The painting reflects the artist's genius, but the artist isn't confined to the canvas. Similarly, the Supreme Person pervades everything we see and experience, yet remains infinitely beyond it all. You know that feeling when you're watching a breathtaking sunset and suddenly feel connected to something vast and eternal? Or when you hold a newborn baby and sense the miracle of existence itself? Those moments give us glimpses of this Supreme Person that Krishna speaks about. It's not that these experiences are separate from the divine, they're expressions of it, yet the source remains mysteriously beyond our complete comprehension. But here's what makes this teaching revolutionary rather than just comforting philosophy. Krishna explains that recognizing this Supreme Person isn't about escaping the world or becoming detached from life. Instead, it's about finding the unshakable center within yourself that can engage fully with life's challenges while remaining grounded in something eternal. Consider a skilled dancer who moves gracefully across the stage. They're completely immersed in the performance, yet there's a part of them that remains the witness, the awareness that observes even while participating. That's the practical application of this teaching. You can be fully present in your relationships, your work, your struggles, while simultaneously connected to that Supreme Person who exists beyond all the drama. Now you might wonder, how does this help when you're stuck in traffic, dealing with a difficult boss, or worried about paying bills? Here's the beautiful paradox. When you touch that place within yourself that's connected to the Supreme Person, your perspective on these challenges completely transforms. They don't disappear, but they lose their power to devastate you. You begin to see them as temporary waves on the surface of an infinite ocean. Krishna uses a powerful metaphor that resonates even today. He describes how the Supreme Person is like the thread that runs through a string of pearls. You can't see the thread when you look at the necklace, but without it, all the beautiful pearls would scatter. Similarly, this Supreme Person is the invisible thread that holds together all of existence, from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy, from your morning coffee ritual to the most profound moments of your life. The practical wisdom here is staggering. When you align yourself with this understanding, decision-making becomes clearer. Should you take that new job? How should you handle that relationship conflict? Instead of being tossed around by external circumstances and other people's opinions, you have access to an inner compass that's connected to the Supreme Person beyond all dualities. What's remarkable is that this isn't about believing in something. It's about recognizing what's already there. It's like suddenly noticing that you've been breathing all along without thinking about it. The Supreme Person isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's the very foundation of your existence that you can choose to acknowledge and align with. As we move forward in our exploration of the Gita, keep this understanding close to your heart. Every teaching that follows builds upon this recognition of the Supreme Person who dances beyond all opposites, yet remains intimately present in every moment of your life. Because once you glimpse this truth, everything else begins to make perfect sense. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, and I'm about to share something that might completely change how you see yourself and the people around you. Krishna is about to reveal one of the most practical pieces of wisdom in the entire Gita, something that's as relevant in our modern world as it was thousands of years ago on that ancient battlefield. You know how sometimes you meet someone and there's just something about them that feels different. Maybe they radiate this calm confidence, or they seem genuinely happy for others' success, or they have this way of making everyone around them feel valued. And then there are others who, well, seem to drain the energy from a room the moment they walk in. Krishna is about to explain exactly what creates these two very different types of people, and more importantly, which path each of us is walking down. He starts by painting a picture of what he calls the divine nature, and I want you to really think about this as he describes it. These aren't supernatural beings he's talking about. These are ordinary people who have cultivated extraordinary qualities. They're fearless but not reckless. They're pure in heart, which doesn't mean they're perfect, but that their intentions come from a genuine place. They're generous without expecting anything in return, and here's the beautiful part. They're disciplined not because someone's forcing them to be, but because they understand that real freedom comes from self-mastery. Now think about someone in your life who embodies these qualities. Maybe it's a teacher who stayed late to help struggling students, not for recognition, but because they genuinely cared. Or perhaps it's that friend who never gossips, who somehow always sees the best in people even when they're being difficult. These people have what Krishna calls divine nature, and the remarkable thing is, they weren't necessarily born this way. They chose this path moment by moment, decision by decision. But then Krishna shifts gears and describes the demonic nature. And honestly, this part can be a bit uncomfortable because we might recognize ourselves in some of these traits. He's talking about people who are driven by ego, who see the world as something to be conquered rather than served. They believe that pleasure and power are the ultimate goals, and they'll step on anyone to get there. They're often successful in worldly terms, accumulating wealth and influence, but there's this underlying anxiety, this constant need to prove themselves, this inability to ever feel truly satisfied. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I want you to grab your coffee and really think about this. Krishna isn't saying these are two different types of people. He's saying these are two different paths that every single one of us can choose every single day. That successful CEO who treats their employees like family while building an empire. Divine nature. That same person, if they started cutting corners, exploiting workers, and caring only about quarterly profits. They've shifted toward demonic nature. The beautiful and sometimes terrifying truth is that we're all capable of both. Think about road rage for a moment. You might be the most compassionate person in the world, volunteering at shelters, caring for elderly parents, but put you behind the wheel when you're late for an important meeting, and suddenly you're honking aggressively and muttering things about other drivers that you'd never say in person. In that moment, you've temporarily stepped onto the demonic path. But here's the hopeful part that Krishna emphasizes. The path isn't permanent. Every interaction is a choice point. When your colleague takes credit for your idea in a meeting, You can choose the divine response, speaking up with dignity while maintaining your integrity, or you can choose the demonic response, plotting revenge and spreading negativity. When you see someone struggling, you can choose to help without expecting recognition, or you can choose to ignore them because it's not your problem. What's fascinating is how these choices compound over time. People on the divine path seem to attract abundance effortlessly, not because they're chasing it, but because their genuine care for others creates trust and collaboration. They build real relationships, not just networks. Their success feels sustainable and fulfilling. Meanwhile, those caught in demonic patterns might achieve short-term gains, but they often find themselves isolated, constantly stressed, and never quite satisfied no matter how much they accumulate. Krishna is essentially giving us a roadmap for recognizing which path we're on at any given moment. Are our actions motivated by love or fear? Are we trying to control outcomes, or are we focused on giving our best effort? Are we competing with others, or are we competing with our own potential? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're daily practical tools for navigation. As we move forward in our exploration of the Gita, keep this framework in mind. Every teaching, every story, every piece of wisdom Krishna shares can be understood through this lens of divine versus demonic nature. And remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Once we can honestly recognize which path we're walking, we can consciously choose to course correct, one coffee break, one conversation, one decision at a time. Picture this. You're sitting with a friend who's going through a rough patch, and they tell you they've lost faith in everything. Now, what exactly do they mean by that? Are they talking about religious faith, faith in people, faith in themselves? Here's what's fascinating about the Bhagavad Gita's exploration of faith. It doesn't just treat faith as one monolithic thing. Krishna breaks it down into 3 distinct types, and understanding these differences might just change how you see your own spiritual journey. Let me paint you a scene first. Arjuna, still grappling with his doubts on the battlefield, asks Krishna something that probably keeps many of us awake at night. What about people who worship with sincere devotion but don't follow traditional scriptures? Are they spiritual failures? Krishna's response is like a master chef explaining that there are many ways to prepare a nourishing meal, each reflecting the cook's nature and understanding. Krishna introduces us to what he calls the 3 types of faith, and they correspond beautifully to the 3 gunas or qualities of nature that we've encountered before. Think of faith not as a single flavor, but as a spectrum with 3 distinct tastes, each attracting different types of people based on their inner nature. The first type is what we might call pure faith, or sattvic faith. These are the people who are drawn to clarity, peace, and genuine spiritual growth. They worship deities and pursue practices that elevate consciousness and bring harmony. Picture someone who finds deep meaning in meditation, who's genuinely interested in understanding truth rather than just feeling good temporarily. They're like gardeners who patiently tend to their inner landscape, knowing that real transformation takes time and consistent care. In our modern world, these might be the people who choose sustainable practices not because it's trendy, but because they genuinely care about long-term well-being for everyone. Now think about this. Have you ever met someone whose faith seems driven primarily by passion and desire? This brings us to the second type, Rajasic faith. These individuals are sincere in their devotion, but their spiritual practice is often motivated by what they want to achieve or obtain. They might worship with great intensity, but there's an underlying transaction happening. They're saying, in essence, I'll be devoted if you give me success, wealth, or power. It's like someone who exercises religiously, but only because they want to look good for others, not for genuine health. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. It's a natural stage of spiritual development, but Krishna points out that this type of faith often leads to temporary satisfaction rather than lasting peace. The third type might surprise you with its relevance to our current times. Tamasic faith is characterized by ignorance, superstition, and often harmful practices. These are people whose religious or spiritual beliefs actually increase suffering, either for themselves or others. Think about those who use spiritual concepts to justify cruelty, or who follow practices that harm their bodies or minds in the name of devotion. In our modern context, this might manifest as toxic positivity, where people use spiritual bypassing to avoid dealing with real problems, or wellness trends that are actually harmful but marketed with spiritual language. Here's where it gets really interesting for us today. Krishna isn't saying that only the first type of faith is valid. Instead, he's offering us a map of spiritual evolution. Most of us probably recognize elements of all three types in our own journey. Maybe you started with Rajasic faith, wanting spiritual practice to fix your problems or bring you success. Perhaps you've encountered Tamasic elements when you've used spiritual concepts to avoid responsibility or justify harmful behavior. The beautiful insight Krishna offers is that faith naturally evolves. Someone with Rajasic faith who consistently practices will gradually develop more sattvic qualities. Even someone stuck in Tamasic patterns can transform through sincere effort and proper guidance. It's like learning to cook. You might start by burning water, but with practice and patience, you can eventually create nourishing, beautiful meals. What makes this teaching so practical is that it helps us understand not just our own spiritual journey, but also how to relate to others. When you encounter someone whose faith seems different from yours, instead of judging them, you can recognize where they might be in their own evolution. That colleague who seems to treat spirituality like a shopping list of desired outcomes isn't necessarily wrong. They're just at a different stage of understanding. The real wisdom here is recognizing that authentic spiritual growth happens when we gradually purify our motivations and deepen our understanding. Faith isn't about believing the right things. It's about the quality of consciousness we bring to our beliefs and practices. As we move forward in our exploration of the Gita, we'll see how these different types of faith influence every aspect of our lives, from the food we eat to the actions we take, creating a complete picture of how consciousness shapes our entire experience of being human. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, and I'm about to share something that could completely transform how you see life's biggest challenges. We've journeyed through the entire Bhagavad Gita together, exploring duty, devotion, knowledge, and action. But now we arrive at Krishna's final, most profound teaching, the ultimate secret that ties everything together like a golden thread. It's about surrender, but not the kind you might think. When most people hear the word surrender, they imagine waving a white flag, giving up, or becoming passive. But Krishna's talking about something radically different. A surrender so powerful it actually liberates you from fear, anxiety, and the endless struggle to control outcomes. Think about the last time you were desperately trying to control a situation that was clearly beyond your power. Maybe it was waiting for medical test results, watching your teenager make questionable choices, or dealing with a difficult boss. Remember that exhausting feeling of pushing against something immovable. Krishna's final teaching addresses exactly this universal human predicament. Here's where it gets fascinating. Krishna tells Arjuna to abandon all varieties of dharma, all the rules, duties, and prescribed paths we've been discussing, and surrender completely to the divine. Now, this isn't Krishna contradicting everything he's taught before. It's like a master chef who spent hours teaching you individual techniques, then reveals the secret ingredient that makes everything work together. The surrender Krishna speaks of isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about releasing your death grip on the results of your actions. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're a skilled surgeon preparing for a complex operation. You've studied for years, your hands are steady, your knowledge is vast. But the moment you step into that operating room obsessing about your reputation, worrying about failure, or trying to control every possible variable, your performance actually suffers. True mastery comes when you surrender to the flow of your training, trust your preparation, and let go of attachment to the outcome. You perform the surgery with complete dedication, but you're not crushed if complications arise that are beyond anyone's control. This is the paradox Krishna reveals. When you surrender the fruits of action, you actually become more effective, not less. Think about the greatest athletes you've ever watched. In their peak moments, they're not thinking about winning or losing, fame or failure. They've surrendered to the pure expression of their skill. There's a beautiful phrase in sports psychology called flow state. It's exactly what Krishna is describing, but applied to all of life. Now you might be wondering, but doesn't this lead to apathy? If I'm not attached to results, won't I stop caring? Here's the beautiful twist. Surrender actually intensifies your engagement with life, not diminishes it. When you're not paralyzed by fear of failure or intoxicated by dreams of success, you can pour yourself completely into whatever you're doing. It's like the difference between dancing because you love the music versus dancing because you're worried about what people think. Which dancer do you think moves with more grace and joy? Krishna promises something remarkable to those who embrace this surrender, freedom from all sin and suffering. But what does this really mean in practical terms? Consider Sarah, a friend of mine who spent years in a job she hated, staying because she was terrified of financial insecurity. She finally decided to surrender her need to control every outcome and pursue work that aligned with her values. Yes, there was uncertainty, but she found that when she stopped fighting against her authentic path, doors opened that she never could have forced. The sin Krishna speaks of isn't just moral wrongdoing. It's the suffering we create by constantly swimming against the current of life. This teaching resonates powerfully with modern psychology. Research shows that people who practice what psychologists call acceptance, a close cousin to surrender, experience less anxiety, better relationships, and greater life satisfaction. When you stop wasting energy on futile resistance, that energy becomes available for creative, meaningful action. But here's what makes Krishna's teaching so profound. This isn't passive resignation. It's active trust. It's like learning to surf. You don't fight the wave, you read it, respect its power, and find your balance within its force. The wave doesn't care about your ego or your plans, but when you surrender to its nature while maintaining your skill and awareness, you can ride it with incredible grace. As we close our journey through the Gita together, remember that this final teaching isn't just philosophical poetry. It's an invitation to experiment with a completely different way of being. What would your life look like if you could act with full commitment while holding outcomes lightly? What energy would be freed up if you stopped trying to control things that were never yours to control in the first place? Krishna's final gift is showing us that true strength lies not in grasping, but in graceful letting go. As we close this sacred text together, the Bhagavad Gita reveals itself not as ancient philosophy, but as a living manual for navigating life's deepest challenges. Arjuna's crisis on the battlefield mirrors our own moments of doubt, paralysis, and moral confusion. Krishna's wisdom offers us a path through. The Gita's genius lies in its integration of seemingly opposing truths: action and detachment, duty and surrender, human effort and divine grace. It doesn't ask us to choose between engagement and spirituality, but to find the sacred within our everyday responsibilities. Here are the key takeaways to carry forward. First, practice dharmic action. Align your choices with your deepest values rather than immediate desires. Start incredibly small. Before making any decision today, pause and ask, what would my highest self do here? Whether it's how you respond to a difficult email or how you treat a stressed family member, let your values guide your actions. Second, cultivate detachment from outcomes while maintaining full engagement in effort. Pour your heart into your work, relationships, and goals, but hold the results lightly. When you catch yourself obsessing over results, gently redirect your energy back to the process. Be patient with yourself. This is perhaps life's most challenging practice. Third, see every moment as an opportunity for spiritual growth. Your job, your relationships, even your struggles become vehicles for awakening. Transform mundane tasks into meditation by bringing complete presence to them. Washing dishes becomes a practice in mindfulness. Difficult conversations become opportunities to practice compassion. Fourth, surrender the illusion of control while taking full responsibility for your choices. You cannot control outcomes, other people, or life circumstances, but you have complete authority over your responses. When anxiety arises about things beyond your control, breathe deeply and ask, what can I actually influence right now? Finally, trust in a larger intelligence at work in your life. Whether you call it God, the universe, or simply the interconnectedness of existence, recognize that you're part of something greater. This doesn't make you passive, but allows you to act with both courage and humility, knowing that your sincere efforts are supported by forces beyond your understanding. The Bhagavad Gita reminds us that enlightenment isn't an escape from life, but a complete embrace of it, with wisdom, love, and unshakable inner peace. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.